The game of nations. It's called competition. It has ever been thus. Nations all through history have wanted to get more gold and enslave more people so that the king can get richer and richer. And it all will culminate in this verse being fulfilled one day. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 and following. He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. There is a reason that is in the Scriptures. And I think we can go all the way back to the first war of history and see that it is developing. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me the game of nations.
The game of nations, motivated by greed. And you know, JR, I find it particularly fascinating that in these latter days, we see things on television like, do you want to be a millionaire? And there's a television game called, they actually came right out and called it Greed, where contestants vie with each other to see how rich they can get in a hurry. There are more and more public institutions that are gearing up with the promise of great wealth. And really, in the end, their goal is simply to take wealth away from the common man and move it into more centralized locations where it can be used by the very greedy. And the Bible speaks about this in at great length.
Yes. From the World Book Encyclopedia on the subject of wars comes this paragraph. The people of ancient empires fought many wars for wealth. The decision to fight was made by the ruler and his advisors. The fighting was done by hired armies, often done by hired armies. A king who sought to conquer new lands did not mean to drive the people out of the lands. Generally, he just wanted to collect the taxes. You know, name of the game.
In the days of Jesus, the Romans had come, JR, and they had taken the promised land and essentially had cut it up among themselves, taking the best portions, taxing the people. As a matter of fact, that's the way the Bible story of the birth of Jesus opens. You know, that's why Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem to be taxed.
That's right.
And when Jesus began his public ministry, one of his primary statements was, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through or steal. And he really stated the fundamental problem right there.
Yes, he did. You know, last few months, people have been hoarding up food supplies for Y2K. And the interesting thing about it all is, not only did they hoard up food, but guns and ammunition to protect what they had hoarded.
That's true.
Because there's no other way to protect it. If people were to get hungry, and that was the supposed scare, that people would get hungry, they'd go looking for food, and they'd get it any way they could. The first war in history, at least the one given in the Bible, is in Genesis chapter 14, and it proves the point quite succinctly. It came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, and then it goes on to name the other kings, that they made war with the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the other kings in the area, because for 12 years these kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their related territory kings served Chedorlaomer. In the 13th year, they rebelled. In the 14th year, here he came in making war against them. And of course, the reason is listed here, called slime pits, Gary. They weren't slime pits, were they?
Oh, no, they were not slime pits. They were called in the Hebrew, Be'er Chemer, which means in plain English, wells of oil. And we have, you know, this is exactly what the war and fighting's all about today. Oil wells.
That's right.
The big powers in the Middle East, all those wells of oil. And you know, JR, these four kings that came down from the north into Sodom and Gomorrah actually represented the four great nations of history. that would rule the Gentile empires as given by Daniel. And the type of battle that they are doing is the very same type of battle that the nations will be waging against the Middle East in the days when Jesus comes. So nothing seems to change very much.
Yeah. The Medo-Persians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, and the Romans.
Yeah.
They were, all of these kings that were initiating this war were the progenitors of those great Gentile nations. That's amazing, right, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You know, the more population you can have in your fledgling nation, the more men would be available for pressing into military service. And the king could have more revenue and taxes, build greater edifices to memorialize his dynasty, and rob nearby nations of their wealth. It has ever been so.
It has ever been so. And in one sense, the battle is between nations. In a biblical sense, it's between the flesh and the spirit. Jesus, in that passage I mentioned just a minute ago in the 6th chapter of Matthew, says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he'll hold to the one and despise the other." And Jesus said, "You cannot serve God and mammon." And there is a wealth of wisdom in there, because the way of the world is mammon. As the saying goes, the one who has the most toys when he dies wins the game.
Gary, do you remember that a lot of historians have been saying, at least in this generation, that most of the wars of history were religious wars? Mm-hmm. And of course, what they're trying to do is cast reflection upon Christians. And it's those mean Christians. If we just didn't have Christianity, we wouldn't have any wars. That was a facade. Right. That was a facade. Every war of history has been fought not over religion, but over money. Let's take, for example, 1492, and Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Oh, was he coming over here to win all these poor Indians to Christ? He was looking for trade routes to India.
He was looking for trade routes to India, and, by the way, it was stimulated by the promise of gold, because what the Bible refers to as the fine gold of Ophir, there was always a mysterious source. It was kind of lost in history. But there were all these legends about gold beyond belief if you just went over the next hill. And the thing that was really stimulating not only Columbus, but also the Queen and the King behind him, yes, Isabella and Ferdinand, they wanted gold.
Yes. As a matter of fact, there are a lot of reasons why that history states why Columbus came, but let's just move forward just a few years and watch these Spanish galleons begin to take all that gold back to Spain. And, you know, several of the Spanish galleons have been found offshore of the Bahamas and Florida, sure, with hoards of gold on them. Well, those are just the ones that didn't make it. Can you imagine how many hundreds of ships, maybe thousands of ships, made it with gold? It was the glory of Spain. And Charles V, of course, who was the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella, relished all of that gold. And it was during his administration, his long administration, that all the Spanish ships took back all the gold from the Americas. And the interesting thing is, Spain went bankrupt 4 times during all that manipulation of taking gold over. And of course, I think it's because he sent the gold home to his family coffers in Austria. The interesting thing about it, Gary, is that England and France began to send ships westward.
Absolutely.
Why?
Yes, why indeed, and we know why.
Yes. And you know, the interesting thing about it, not only were they wanting trade with the Indians and commodities and what have you, but the age of the pirates taking the gold from the Spanish galleons flourished. And you know, those pirates could not just have been men out for themselves. It's one of the unspoken things of history that they were in the service of their king.
Absolutely.
They were soldiers without uniform.
Indeed.
Taking the gold. And so, hey, it's always been about gold, Gary.
And even before the age of the pirates and before the age of Columbus, there is a legitimate history that goes back to biblical times, to a city named Tyre, and a king, a generic king called Tyrus. He's it's more of a title than a proper noun, actually. And Tyrus was the king of the seas. The great Phoenician traders that sent ships out all over the world trading goods for gold was the foundation of this whole system. And it was a transnational system. That is, it owed its allegiance to no nation, but simply to the idea of obtaining wealth. And that's where it started.
The idea of getting natural resources from other countries that your country does not have by trade, and if not by trade, then by force. And it's going to be one way or the other. You remember the English bought Manhattan Island for a string of pearls? Who got the raw deal? There's more. We'll be back in just a moment. I saw a made-for-television movie recently about George Washington taking a couple of thousand ragamuffin kids into Trenton and fighting the Hessian troops. And it was quite an interesting movie. They took only 2,000 kids, teenagers. I mean, the rest of his army had already forsaken him, and his advisors thought Washington was mad because he was going against these Hessian German mercenary troops under the command of General Rahl and trying to surprise them. Well, they came up on Trenton at 8 o'clock in the morning, a few hours after sunrise. No chance, one would think, of catching these Germans by surprise. But he was able to catch them by surprise and take the town and capture all the Hessian troops without losing a single soldier. It's a fascinating movie. One of the interesting things is, in that wet morning air, one gun actually discharged, and it killed the German general. In his dying moments, he asked to see General Washington. And when Washington was told that he should go see the German general, he exploded and said, "Why should I go to see that scoundrel? He only fights for money. He's a mercenary." And then General Washington was reminded by his advisor, are we not also fighting over money? We're fighting against British taxation, you know. Well, the point was well taken, and so General Washington went to see the dying German. That was interesting to me, Gary, because, let's face it, the war was fought over money.
The great search for mammon. And J.R., you know, the Bible is extremely clear about this. Ezekiel 27 talks about the merchant traffic of the whole world. It talks about some people called the merchants of Tarshish, and it says in Ezekiel 27:12, Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kind of riches. With silver, iron, tin, lead, they traded in the fairs. And the list of merchandise just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And essentially, it says, the ships of Tarshish did sing of thee, that is the king of Tyre, in the market, and thou wast replenished and made very glorious in the midst of the seas. But in the end, J.R., this prophecy says, all of your ships are going to be broken in the midst of the waters.
Yes.
Because you have sought literally to gain and to control all the wealth of the world through your merchant traffic. It's an old prophecy, reaches all the way to the latter days.
When Mystery Babylon is destroyed, in Revelation chapter 18, verse 11 says, "And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more." That says it all, doesn't it, Gary?
Sure does.
Now let's look at this idea that the future world government is going to take over the world and make everybody get a mark in the right hand or in the forehead before they can buy or sell. For what reason? Well, first of all, you cannot have peace unless you eliminate competition. If you subjugate a people, such as we won the war in World War I over Germany, and because of the imposed poverty of the German people, they rallied to an Adolf Hitler just a few years later. So the time between World War I and World War II was really only an interregnum, just a brief respite between wars. And you remember it was Woodrow Wilson who says we fought this war to end all wars?
Oh, yes.
But it didn't work because, you see, competition was not eliminated. Now, there's one way of eliminating competition, and that is to kill off everybody. Can you imagine if you were the only person alive in a world? You'd go down Main Street and find you a nice set of clothes, you know, get you the finest automobile, just take it, nobody else alive, just take it off the car lot, and drive it and put some gasoline in it, and all that would be great for a while, you know. You get you a big color TV, the best, okay? Turn it on, there's nothing to watch. Where are you going to go in your car? Well, there's nothing to see. And so you cannot eliminate competition. All you can do is control it. There's only one way to control it. And here's the ultimate way here in the book of Revelation. Sign in the hand of the forehead before you can buy or sell. You cannot eliminate competition. You can only control it. Do you remember the Soviet Union and communism, how they tried to eliminate competition?
Sure.
In a socialist society? It didn't work, did it, Gary?
Didn't work. And by the way, the Great Social Society was really a new form of monarchy in which the hands of a very few men held all the wealth, and they became leaders of a new ruling class, which, by the way, was overthrown recently, in a sense, meaning that the wealth was dispersed into what has in our day come to be called the global village. Our own president has recently stated, and I can't quote him, maybe you can, that we must remain global in our perspective.
It was President Clinton in his State of the Union address. He said, we've started down the road to globalism. There's no turning back.
Yeah.
No turning back.
And what is globalism? Globalism is simply the idea that a very few men, perhaps 200 or 300 worldwide, will simply control the wealth of the entire world.
Yes. J.C. Helms went to the United Nations and let them know that he didn't like what they were doing and saying about the United States. And Clinton let everybody know that J.C. Helms did not speak for the White House. And that we are moving toward a one world government and a global society, and there will be no turning back. That was the message he had. Let me give you just a little example here. Tragedy in Angola, says this article from the WorldNet Daily internet website. And he goes on to say that UNITA, which is the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, is currently being wiped from the face of the earth by its communist neighbors. And there's a reason for that, Gary. These Christian people, and they are Christians, and the UNITA movement of southern Angola, and among the Zulus, they own the diamond mines. And Cecil Rhodes' company, De Beers, wants the diamond mines for themselves. They sell $1 billion a year of diamonds, and it's amazing. It says here, all for millions of dollars, the rights to lucrative gold, diamonds, and copper mines. 1994, the ousting of the leaders in South Africa and installing the Marxist African Congress led by Nelson Mandela, and Mandela made one of his priorities to destroy UNITA.
J.R., there's a statement in this article that just really summarizes it. It says the current communist offensive in Angola against UNITA is in no small part related to the fact that UNITA controls lucrative diamond fields coveted by De Beers Corporation. De Beers, which signed a secret diamond deal with the Soviet Union in the 1950s to monopolize the world diamond market, is anxious to see UNITA defeated. Now here is the kind of behind-the-scenes manipulation of wealth that we're talking about. Men strip to the waist and go down into those hot diamond mines and work for a handful of rice to bring up those little diamonds, which then are collected and used as capital among the great powers of the world.
Now listen to this paragraph. In 1998, President Clinton signed Executive Order 13098, which forbade U.S. companies from doing business with UNITA. It also sought to block UNITA's exportation of diamonds. This demand was carried out by the United Nations. Greed, Gary.
Greed.
An example, a perfect example of greed. And listen, the Christians are being slaughtered in Angola.
Yes, they are.
Some of the terrible things, for example, in late 1970s, Cuban-backed MPLA persecuted Christians in Angola, causing many of them to flee. Not only did the Cubans go against them, but North Korea sent troops, Russians sent troops, and these poor people in South Africa have fought one communist regime after another, all because of the diamond mines.
Yes. Global greed. I have to throw in James chapter 5, go to, now you rich men weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you in the latter days. Your riches are corrupted and your garments are moth-eaten. JR, there's a passage here in James 5 that talks about the hire of the laborers, the people who do all the work, being kept back by fraud. In other words, the people who work for this global engine do not receive their fair share of the wealth.
Amazing, isn't it? And so our point, I think, has been well made. The Antichrist will establish the mark of the beast for one reason, not to get rid of competition, but to control competition, so that he and his cronies will sit on top of the ash heap, enjoying the wealth of the world, which they have collected for themselves. Basically, that's what it's all about. It is the enslavement of the human race, and it will lead to Armageddon. We'll be back in just a moment.